Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be replacing the injectors on my 340i. This is something that I know a lot of you guys have been asking me, when am I going to post a DIY about this? And honestly, I know a lot of you are even trying to replace these just in case, like on a maintenance interval. I'm not really a huge fan of that, so that's why I haven't replaced the injectors on any of my cars yet. I'm actually not replacing the injectors on the 340i. I am replacing the valve cover. But as a part of that process, you have to remove and reinstall the injectors. So I figured I'd just use this opportunity to create a DIY on replacing the injectors as well. But for everybody that's been wondering, why I haven't made it, that's why I haven't made a DIY. I'm not really a fan of fixing something that isn't broken, and I prefer to keep the engine as close to factory sealed as possible for as long as possible, because that's usually what gives me the best luck with my vehicles. So for me personally, it doesn't matter if you have a 2016, like an early B58 or anything like that. I usually just recommend leaving them as is for as long as possible. Keep an eye on your logs. If your car starts misfiring or having any other issues, then, immediately replace them as needed. And of course, in that case, this video is for you. But other than that, this isn't really something that I recommend doing every 60,000 miles or something. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and go through that process. And hopefully this helps you out if you are one of those people that need to replace it, or maybe you just want to know the process in case you do have to do it in the future. Keep in mind the actual engine portion is pretty much the same for all B58s, but the trim, of course, is going to be a little bit different. So depending on the model that you have, you'll have different like cowl panels and stuff like that on Supras and stuff compared to mine. If you do have like an M140i, M240i, 340 or 440, then the process will be the exact same. Now, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create a lot of DIYs like these, as well as post other videos that help keep you up to date on the latest development in our community, and hosting technical discussions so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in any videos like that, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell and all that good stuff so you can see more of my videos when they come out in the future. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we want to do is disconnect the negative terminal of the battery. The reason why we do this is because, of course, you're working on the fuel system as a part of this process. And, every time you unlock your car and you hear everything buzzing, one of those sounds is the fuel system priming. And so it pressurizes the fuel system to make it easier for you to start your car. If you do that potentially with the fuel system disconnected, you'll spray fuel in your face, make a mess everywhere, so it's not really worth it. And then, of course, we're also going to be disconnecting a bunch of electrical sensors and stuff like that, so it's always the safest bet to disconnect your battery first. I know people out there are going to try to do this without disconnecting their battery, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you not to. So all you do is give that little screw a half turn, and then with a 10mm socket, we can loosen the negative terminal down here. Now you also want to have two microfiber towels here. The first microfiber towel I use when I disconnect this terminal. I can put it underneath here and just make sure that it doesn't reconnect by mistake. And then the other thing that I do is I put another towel through this loop. So hopefully nobody walks by and tries to close the trunk while you're working on it with the battery disconnected, but this will prevent you from even being able to close the trunk by mistake. And now we'll go back to the front of the car. Now we're going to go ahead and remove all of the cowl panels that are at the back of the engine bay. Of course, again, depending on your model, this might be a little bit different. So I'm going to show you how to do it on my 340i. But if you've done spark plugs or basically any other service on your car where you need to reach the back of your engine, then you already know how to do this on your vehicle. But for my car, we go back here and there are 3 screws. You give each one a 1/4 turn, and we're going to do that on each side. And then you can basically pull straight up and remove this panel from each side. And of course, put it somewhere where it's safe so you won't step on it by mistake, because I've done that and it sucks having cracked plastic pieces right on top of your engine. Then we're going to remove this rubber grommet. The first thing is removing this wire that runs all the way across the car to your DME. and then this just pulls straight out. Then you're going to use a trim tool, and there are two little caps at the back of the engine, so we're going to put the tool underneath each cover and pop it straight out. And then remove these little dust caps that are on top of your strut tower. And try not to knock your camera over. Now next we're going to remove the black strut tower brace that's at the back of the engine bay. I know these bolts are a little bit different depending on the car that you have. So on mine, the front two on the strut tower itself is an E18. And then in the rear, those are 16 millimeter bolts. So again, just kind of use the ones that you need. You're going to need E-Torx anyway. So if you don't have an E-Torx set, go ahead and get that. And then use the appropriate socket to remove those bolts. You should have two of these, but I only have one. And then we can go ahead and pull out the strut brace. And now we have a bunch of 10 millimeter screws for this rear cowl cover. So just work your way all the way around. There are 3 on this side. There's 3 on this side, and then one that's kind of hidden down here by the DME cover. So 7 in total. Now you're only going to see me remove 6 of these because I'm missing the bolt that goes right here. But like I said, there's kind of a hidden one behind the DME cover. So you'll have to remove that one as well. And then this whole panel comes off. And now we have clear access to the whole top of the engine. All right, next we are going to remove the coil packs. And in order to do that, you need an E8 torque socket. And that's going to go on these little screws to loosen them up. And you're going to do that on all 6. And then we also have this little plug back here. In order to remove that, it works just like every other sensor on our cars. So you pop this tab out, and then you kind of squeeze it and pull. And that's how it works. So this little tab pops in and out. So all you want to do is put a fingernail in here and pop it out. If it's not coming easily, you can use a little trim tool to pop it out, and then you'll be able to pull it out of the coil pack. So we'll do that for all 6, and then pull all of those to remove them. And ignore this first one being so loose. That's one of the reasons I'm replacing the valve cover, because the threads in here are all messed up, so I can't even properly screw the coil pack down to hold it in place. So lots of things a little messed up with this valve cover. Now next we're going to remove these 2 grounds. So if you look on the fuel rail, there's a ground nut right here, and there is a ground nut right here. So we're going to use an 8 millimeter socket to remove both of those. And be careful with these, they are very small. What I'm going to try to do to make sure I don't lose them is lift this up, and then I'm probably going to put them right back on the post on the fuel rail, so that way I don't lose it. And next we're going to unplug each of the injectors. Again, the connectors are the exact same, so you're going to pop the little tabs up, and then you squeeze it and pull it off. And do that for all 6. All right, that kind of sucked. There were a bunch of tabs missing on the wiring harness, so I ended up doing that off camera. But we got it all done. So now we can move this harness out of the way. And now we've almost got everything ready to actually access our injectors. Now what we're going to need to do is remove this high pressure fuel line from the high pressure fuel pump, and then we'll remove the actual rail. But all of this has pressurized fuel in here, so we're going to want to get some shop rags or towels underneath to slowly start letting that fuel seep out. So I like to use this lower line since this is kind of where most of the fuel will drain out anyway. So we'll take this towel and run it underneath. Got a hard line nut. And then use a 17mm socket to slowly unscrew it. Just crack it barely, and you'll see the fuel start coming out. Hopefully. There we go. So we're just going to let that drain a little bit, and then once it's fully drained out and we think there's not a lot more fuel left, then we'll start loosening the other nuts. Now most of the fuel is drained out of that connection over by the high pressure fuel pump, so I went ahead and added more towels underneath the other 2 hardline connections, and then we'll start loosening those nuts as well. A whole lot of fuel shouldn't come out, but just in case. With some stuff like this, it seems like it's almost impossible to get it all out anyway. And this kind of covers up the coil pack holes, so a little more protection just to make sure you're not getting fuel in an area where you don't want it to be. That rag's getting soaked up pretty good, so more fuel seems to be coming out. Now that I guess there's some space for air to come in behind it, we'll just keep loosening these slowly until everything's completely off. And also a good idea to remove this high pressure fuel pump connector to give you the clearance to actually remove the hard line. And try your best to like wrap up all of the connections, so hopefully you don't have too many drips or anything as you're pulling this out. Next, we're going to remove the actual fuel rails for the injectors. And what we have is this fuel rail pressure sensor at the front. So same thing as the other ones, pull out the tab and squeeze, and it should pull right off. And then on each fuel rail, you have 4 screws that are actually securing it to the valve cover. So you have basically 2 offset right here, and then you have 2 offset right here. So there's 1, 2, and 1, 2. And then the 2 pairs of screws that are next to each other, those are holding onto the injectors. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the 4 on each fuel rail that actually hold the injectors in place. And I forgot to mention these are E8 bolts, just like the coil pack. Ow. Okay, so now we are ready to remove the actual fuel rail, but I want to give you guys a heads up before I do this part. So the injectors are designed to be removed with a special tool. The whole point of the special tool is so that you can basically slowly pull the injectors out without putting too much tensile force on the ends of the injectors. Now I'm going to use the tool because I have it. I know a lot of people don't. And the other way that you can do it if you want is basically leaving the fuel rail attached to the injectors and pulling everything out as one piece, because the tool kind of simulates what the fuel rail is doing here, but it attaches to the actual injectors instead of using these screws. And when you do that, it's able to pull the injectors out. But if you don't have the special tool, you can, kind of pull them straight out with them still attached to the fuel rail. It's kind of up to you if you want to do it that way. But I bought the tool. It is available at BimmerNetwork if you guys want to buy it from them. And they are, a great company to work with. So I'll have a link down in the description if you need that tool for this process. Now, obviously, I can't say that I recommend doing it that way because there are a lot of different ways that you can potentially damage the injectors, or worse, you could damage the valve cover, crack something around here. That would be, a bad situation to be in. But I know people have done it that way. So this is just kind of your FYI that it is possible. The other nice thing is that avoids messing up the alignment of the injectors when you reinstall it, because they have to be at a set height, and that height is not fully installed in the fuel rail. So there's like a little bit of a gap there to set everything at the right height. So yeah, if you want to do it that way and you don't have any of the special tools, that is a way that you can kind of pull them out without the special tool, and also know that you're reinstalling them at an even height without using like the measurement block to make sure they're all evenly spaced out. Now, since I do have the tool, we're going to go ahead and follow the book. So next we're going to remove the 2 screws that are in each injector, and these are an E6. So make sure you don't try to reuse the E8 because that can round these off. What you'll kind of notice is because of the way that they're kind of balanced on here, you might have one that's a little bit tight, and then the next one is loose because it's like a loose part underneath that it's screwed into. So once you loosen one side, then it kind of gives it a little bit of room on the other side as well. All right, and now we can lift up the fuel rail. Just to be extra safe, we're going to put some more shop towels in the coil pack holes just to make sure, again, we don't get any fuel anywhere we don't want it to. And then we should be able to lift it straight up. Yeah, lots of fuel leaking out. So I just kind of put my rag on the inlet for the hard line so I could flip it over and help majority of the fuel kind of come out on the side where I can control it a little bit. Now, if it's your first time removing injectors and they're basically stock like the way they came from the factory, they're going to have these little rubber like grommet things on them. So these aren't actually needed. They're just needed for the tools that they use at the factory to install everything and assemble the engine. But we're just going to pull these off and we're not going to reinstall them. Keep in mind, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is never been replaced. It just means that, maybe the previous person that did replace it didn't know that they weren't needed and just reinstalled it. But at least we know that we're not going to reuse it again. Okay. I need to put on my shoes first so I can come with you. Now, this is what the toolkit looks like if you're going to be using like the OEM style kit to replace your injectors. But the way that it works is each of these attach onto the injectors, and then you're going to unscrew it with these attachments, and that slowly pulls the injector out of the cylinder head. So I'll show you guys exactly how it works. So how this works is we're basically going to put this piece on top of the injector. When it's in the up position, it is unlocked, and then when it's down, it's locked. So it starts in the unlocked position, and you're basically going to put it on the injector, and then you turn it, and this will go down, and if you pull on it, you can see that it's actually locked on the injector. So you basically start with it, if you're looking at it this way, you start with it at 9 o'clock, and then you turn it, and the little pin drops, and now it's locked in place. So we're going to do that for all 6 injectors. Well, of course, just 3. We're only going to do the front fuel rail first. Now next, we're going to disassemble the actual toolkit. Now the way that this works is you need to actually tighten it, like turn it clockwise, in order to back it off. So I'm going to turn it all the way clockwise and pull it out. Do that for all 4 of them. Now next, I'm going to take this little screw piece, pull the screw out, and then each of these are going to align with these holes in the actual tool. And it's going to, like I said, it's going to mount up the same way that the actual fuel rail mounts up. So line it up with those holes. The spacer goes on the bottom, and then the screw goes through the little spacer. It's kind of hard to balance all of these, but just take your time, get it all lined up. And then you only really need to hand tighten the actual screws. So yeah, just kind of take your time, align each hole, and get each one started a little bit so you know it's properly aligned. And then you'll hand tighten each one. As long as it's holding it up, that's all you really need, is just some support. It doesn't need to be like super torqued down or anything. Now next, we're going to go ahead and screw these on top of the actual injectors. So this is where you're going to be able to actually pull it out. All right, guys, I'm jumping in here because I didn't realize something when I was doing this at first. So this piece pulls out of here, and you can basically push in this button and it slides off. So if you want to make it a little bit easier, you can just screw in the brass piece first and then slide this on top and actually tighten it down to remove the injector. So just keep that in mind. That's not the way that I did it in this video. I didn't have any issues, but that's technically the better way to do it. Again, it's reverse thread, or kind of like the opposite of what you probably think. So you need to turn it counterclockwise to lower it onto the injector. And you can look underneath. You should be able to see it kind of grab the threads and just kind of snug it up. Now at this point, what we can do is tighten this top nut to get it snug the rest of the way. And that's going to start pulling the injector out. Now this one is giving me a little bit of trouble, so I'm going to use a box wrench, and there are like 2 kind of flat sides, and you can use that to give you a little more leverage. I'm just using a 17 millimeter. There we go. Now I can do it the rest of the way. Not guaranteeing that it'll always be this easy to pull it out, but for me, it is working. And now we loosen these screws to fully remove the tool. Let's see if we get them all. Yep.
I think we get them all, Daddy.
So it should pull out just like this. Now I'm going to keep them organized in the order that the injectors came out. You don't necessarily need to do that because there isn't any special coating or anything needed with your injectors, but because I'm going to be reusing these to replace my valve cover, and I just like that additional knowing that I'm keeping it the same, I'm going to keep them in the same order. Now, of course, you're going to do the same thing for the rear rail to pull out those 3 injectors, and then we'll kind of go to the bench to talk about the replacement process. So now we just unscrew each of these, get the tool out of the way, and then you remove each of these. So push the connector up, rotate it, and it comes off.
Yeah. Can I try?
Careful. You don't have to put it on the camera, it's okay. So push the pin up. Now turn the whole thing other way and pull. Good job. So now there are a couple things that we want to keep in mind. First of all, of course, you can inspect the actual injector itself. So kind of look around and see if there's any damage or any signs of anything that would cause your failure. I'm not really seeing anything on here, so I'm not really planning on replacing this one. Like I said, I'm just doing a valve cover replacement, and this is a part of the process. Now, the other thing is, if you're not replacing your injectors and just inspecting them like this, or maybe you're only replacing one injector and you plan on reinstalling the other 2, what you're going to want to do is replace this seal. Now, I'm not doing it because I'm lazy, but typically you would want to do that. I bought the seals, but I actually forgot to buy the tool for it. And the way it works is it's kind of like a bullet-shaped attachment onto the top of the injector. And this seal is kind of like hard plastic. So in order to slide it on here, you use another tool to push it over that bullet, and it kind of tapers up and stretches it out. And then it can kind of snap into position here. You also need to compress it because, as you can see, it's pretty much the same diameter as the metal in this case. But after you've stretched it out to put it on here, it'll kind of be loose. So you'll need another tool to slide over this, and that compresses it and holds it in place. So just kind of depends. You know, if you're just replacing the injector, don't worry about it. If you're doing what I'm doing, removing and then reinstalling one without replacing it, you should be replacing these seals. Since I have the seals already, you know, I'll just kind of keep them on hand. And if I do have any issues from being lazy now, then I'll actually fix that in the future. And also, if these come off, you basically just slide it back on and rotate it. They fit loose by design, so that's not something that's messed up. Now, in order to reinstall the injectors, you need to keep in mind one last thing. So we've got an injector right here, and you're basically going to screw it onto the fuel rail with those 2 screws that you removed, but it doesn't tighten all the way down. So what you're going to do is feed a screw through. Make sure the actual connector for your injector is facing the front of the car. So like this is cylinder 1. We can see where the fuel pressure sensor is. All right, now as you're tightening it down, you're going to want to use this little spacer block that came with your injector kit. And this is why if you remove it with the fuel rail installed, then you don't want to remove it completely from the fuel rail. You have to have this piece to make sure that all of them are the same distance from the fuel rail. So you kind of shove it in like this, and then you tighten this the rest of the way down. Do a couple turns on each side until it's snug. I think the torque spec's like 5 Newton meters, so it's really not that tight. But you can see like it's snug in here now. Well, pretty snug. So tighten that down. I'll use a tool to go back in here and make sure it's right, but you guys get the idea. You're going to tighten these screws down until this is snug in here, and then when you remove it, you can see the injector's kind of loose. But the main thing is making sure that it's at the right distance from the fuel rail. And every single injector is going to be spaced the same way. So that way when you reinstall it, all of the injectors are at the same distance into the cylinder head. And that's really critical, because if you want this spray to be reliable and efficient, you need all of the cylinders to be spraying the same amount of fuel at the same distance, same position, so that it's all even. So this is super critical. If you remove it from the fuel rail, then you absolutely need to buy the toolkit so you can space this out properly. Do not miss this step. So we're going to do that for all of the injectors, and then we will go back and reinstall everything. It's basically just the reverse of the removal process. All right, now we are going to put the injectors back in. I went back and took a little more time just to make sure both sides are as close to even as possible. So basically try to make it so that you have the same amount of threads on each side when you're tightening it on that block. I was kind of rushing at first, just showing you guys how it's done, but it is important to make sure that it's even so that all of the injectors are basically the same distance as far as how far they are extended into the cylinder head. So now we line it all up. Make sure they're all going into the cylinder head. It should go in just like that. And then for the front three, same deal. Just be careful, of course, try not to drop it or anything. Guide them in slowly. Make sure they're all pointed into the head. And then lower it down. If you need to, you can give it a little push. Make sure they're fully seated. And then we are going to actually tighten down the fuel rails. Also keep in mind these bolts are supposed to be replaced as well. So you can buy replacement bolts to put all of this back together the exact way that BMW would tell you to. It's always a good feeling when you had a big hole in your engine working on something and now you finally are like covering it up and protecting it. So yeah, try to get to this point as quickly as possible. Minimize the chance of, contaminants, anything going into the cylinder head, getting into the fuel rails, the fuel lines. You basically want all of these parts open for as little time as possible. And then you can, of course, also plug in the fuel pressure sensor. This is one of those big jobs where it isn't a bad idea to not start the car as soon as you get everything done. You can kind of put it in accessory mode and just scan for codes. Double and triple check that you didn't leave anything disconnected by mistake, because you unplugged a lot of sensors, a lot of electrical connections. So just turn on the car and battery without actually turning over the engine. Let the diagnostics run. Scan for codes, see if you see any open circuits or anything that indicates you left something unplugged. And then that way you can make sure everything is good before you actually, start a car and potentially have something disconnected that causes an issue. Also, there is a tightening sequence for these fuel rails. So I'll put the torque specs again up on the screen and everything, but you want to do the outside bolts first and then the middle 2 bolts. Alright, last couple touches. I did find this grommet on the 440, so since it was missing on this car and I don't need it on the 440, we are going to install it on here. It'll kind of dampen the fuel rail, I guess. So yeah, really at this point, we're just putting the last couple pieces together. We're going to put our coil packs back on, plug our ignition system back in. So bring that wire over, plug in all of our connectors for the coil packs and the injectors and the grounds, and put all of our cowl panels along the back of the car. And like I said, just kind of put it on in accessory mode the first time after you reconnect the battery and everything. Then scan for codes, see if anything pops up. If it has open circuit on the code description, then that's probably a sensor that you forgot to reconnect. So make sure you connect everything that you can before starting the car and turning it over. And that'll prevent you from potentially causing a bigger problem. And yeah, that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.